Hi everybody, in today's video I'm going to be showing you how to bevel and chamfer the edges of your Scratchbuild parts or models. As I specifically build mechs, this is something I notice quite a lot. So the edges of this Kshatriya foot, as you can see, they are chamfered back. This is usually a lot easier on the eye. Hard, blocky edges are sometimes a little bit too abrupt. This piece has very fine beveled edges, but they are still sort of present and there. This part has chamfered edges underneath, which I found quite interesting. Tools that we're going to be using are a variety of scraping tools, sanding blocks and files, and very niche tools. We will cover all these in more detail later. The Sharpie is one of my favourite things to use when scratch building, and we have some guide tape which we will also use. The first thing that I like to do is I take my Sharpie and I mark the edges of what needs to be beveled. I picked up this method from watching Matt Moroza here on YouTube. He's a resin builder, and as you can see from his work, he's very talented. I'll leave a link to his channel below. You'll see why this is important as we go through the steps later. The first thing we do, or the first method, is just good old scraping. You can take a hobby blade and just gently work your way across the piece. Ideally, you want to try and keep the same sort of angle. You don't need to force the blade, just take your time. I don't use my hobby knife for this anymore, but I will explain what I do. So here is the result after a few seconds of scraping. The method that I use the most is I do scrape, but I use a straight edge razor. Please be extremely careful when doing this because these things are extremely sharp, and I have definitely cut myself more times than I would like to mention. There are tools that you can get with already preset angles for scraping. This is a gift that I received from Nao from Japan. I'll put a link to his channel below. This tool has several different angles as well as rounded edges and is used the same way. It's just used to scrape along the edges. You can make your own using a MadWorks carving guide tool, usually used for scribing, but if you pop a blade in, you can use this to do the edges. I got this from Becky Customizer, and a link to her store will also be below. So once you've got the angle that you'd like, just make sure it's secure, and again, you're just going to drag along the side until you get the bevel that you want. You can actually make your own using styrene and spare blades, and these are two different angles that I have lying around. One is sort of a 90 and a 45. So all you do again is make sure that the piece is flat and just scribe up the part until you get the bevel you want. The second method is something I use all the time. So I always start off the edge with my straight edge razor, and then I quickly use a metal file to then get the bevel that I want. I find this method very, very effective, and you'll notice that I'm only sanding in one direction so that I don't round off the edges. And that's the result of a little bit of filing. If you wanted to get a deeper chamfer, I'd recommend using your Sharpie to mark the edges of the part you're going to be chamfering off. The next step is taking some guide tape, and this is from HobbyMate. I'm not going to do a review on the tools and things in this video. I think I'll leave that to another one, but just showing you where I got the stuff and why, how I use them. So I place the tape on the part, and this is to protect the back of the piece while I'm filing the front edge. So I start it off the same again, same method, just get my blade and then go to town with a file. Now this does take a little while and patience, and you need to keep checking, especially those sharpied edges, but eventually you'll get something like this. And now we want to make the bevel a bit bigger, so I went away and sanded it a little bit more, and there we go. That's a much deeper chamfered edge. Now the next thing to do is just take the tape off, and I know what you're thinking, well, what about all that awful Sharpie that's everywhere? If you take a little high grit sanding block, so this is 1000 grit, I'm just going to sand it down till all that Sharpie disappears, and then you'll be left with something like that. It's just a little bit difficult to see on the camera, but there you go. So you've got your nice hard edge, and then you just continue to remove the rest of that Sharpie, and you're left with a nice little interesting piece. If you wanted a way to guarantee that all the angles were going to be exactly the same, you could use something like this, which is a high Q sanding block. You can set the degrees that you'd like to bevel to, and as you'd imagine, you just put the piece in and then just sand it down. It is a good tool. It is quite small though, so it's not great for long edges. But yeah, for small pieces it's pretty good, and the results are good too. If you wanted to make your own sanding jig, it's not something I've done personally, but I think it's something that could be done. Tim, the Child of Mecca, I'll put a link to his channel below, makes a lot of different jigs for cutting and scribing, so I don't think it's completely out of the woods to make your own sanding block for your own specific bevels. So yeah, check out his stuff. The next method is Julius Lim's method. An incredible scratch builder. If you haven't seen his work, I will link it in the description. Definitely go check it out. He takes a caliper at a set distance and marks the edge of the piece that needs to be beveled. He then takes a pencil just to make sure that this line is visible. Taking a Sharpie, he marks the edge like we've done previously, and then takes a knife to cut back the bevel. Doing this method leaves the edge a little bit rough. As you can see here, it's not completely flat, but you have a nice area to work from. So then taking a blade to clean up the edge, and then finally a file to then clean up all those scrape marks, will leave you with a really nice beveled edge. Julius, in my opinion, is one of the best scratch builders in the world, and somebody that I look up to. He inspires me a lot in this hobby. As you can see here, this is a perfect grade blue frame that he was scratch building. Definitely go check out his blog, guys. The final method is just a little bit of a bonus for anyone that lasted this long in this tutorial. Something I do often. I bevel a few edges like this, and then using some guide tape, I create a section that I'd like to further bevel in. So I'm just going to take my nippers just to trim the guide tape so it doesn't get in the way. I'm going to take my Sharpie just to remark the beveled edge we've already got going, and the idea here is we're going to bevel it back even further. So just using the same methods we did before, but the guide tape stops us at both ends. Again, you could measure this, and this is very sort of specific to what you're working on, but here you go. So using a smaller file, I'm just going to deepen that bevel. And then once it's all cleaned up and you've got rid of all the Sharpie, you are left with this, which is, you know, an interesting little notch with two different degrees of bevel. An example of this is I used it on my Vindicator's legs. It's only a very fine bevel, but you can see it here in this picture. In the grand scheme of things, it's probably hardly even noticed, but in person, it gives you a little bit more interest to the legs. So I'd like to take this time to say thank you very much for watching the tutorial. If you have any other methods that I didn't cover, then feel free to comment and put them below. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos like this.